Although I usually would have done the opening for our meeting today, and someone from the psychology department would have introduced Dr. Burlingame, I asked Susie if she would do the welcome, and asked Dr. Hedges, the chair of the psychology department, if I could have the honor of introducing him. I switched these roles because when I started graduate school in 1985, Gary was a young, energetic, new assistant professor from, well, that's right, he had hair. Yeah. Just having arrived a few years earlier from the University of Utah. I remember him as that intense, energetic faculty member. The truth is that intensity hasn't changed much, nor that energy level. And he was one who cared a lot about his students and was passionate about psychotherapy research and about clinical psychology. He expected a lot from us, and yet he was willing to match or even exceed our efforts in order to help us learn. He was a mentor and friend, yet he was one who could also ask for your very best and get it from his students. It doesn't surprise me that in the intervening 27 years since I first met him, that he's published 4 books, dozens of chapters, nearly 100 peer-reviewed articles. His capacity is significant, and his analytic ability has always been incredible. He's especially adept at sizing up small groups very quickly. And in a moment, you'll have a chance to hear about that talent and a little bit about his lifelong pursuit in that arena. In addition to being a prolific author, he's received numerous awards and honors, some of which are listed in your program. For example, he served as the president of the American Psychological Association's Society for Group Psychology and Group Psychotherapy. And he's received several university awards. And the interesting thing about those university awards is that they cover all areas of faculty life. He has this scholarship award and has received the University Professor Award for his scholarship. He's received teaching awards, and he's also received awards for excellent service. That's a pretty unusual thing for faculty to have awards across that. And I think that's one reason why he was especially fitting for the Hickman Award, because of that ability to span all of these talents, just like Mark Hickman did. Talented in all areas. And although I'm still a little bit bitter about the B+ that I got in his major class in 1988, winter semester, I am personally grateful for his role in my education. I consider him to be an influential teacher and mentor, but more than that, really a friend and a brother. Thank you, Gary, and please join me in welcoming the Martin B. Hickman Outstanding Scholar, Gary Burlingame.
Well, thank you. This is a surprise and an honor, and I think I first want to speak to the Hickman family about why it's an honor to be here in a lecture with Martin's name on it. I came to BYU from graduate school. This was my first job. I didn't know much about the Utah culture, and I knew nothing about the BYU culture. Martin was a very warm, welcoming dean. He was the dean that hired me. He told me for sure that I would easily fit in. I wondered about that when I had Dick Bednar, you remember Dick, invite me to a steakhouse, and I went thinking I was going to get prime rib. And the address was a church, and I had some experiences with firesides and a few other things. But Martin was, the comprehensive clinic was brand new. We had 5 training programs, all of those training programs, 3 deans, all of those training programs for good reasons were competing for students and budget and space and on and on and on. And as a core faculty, I was in those meetings and I was scared because of the intensity of some of the energy around that. And he was amazing. And I think Martin is one of the reasons I stayed here at BYU. So as I go along, if there's anything that you find of value, you can take credit for it because Martin participated in mentoring me early on. That's what this is for. So that's that. Imagine that slide was on there. Well, you know, and you were looking at that while I was telling you that story. Okay. I was president of one of the divisions of APA, and I started out my first board meeting. Now, it's kind of interesting. This board meeting was made up of all of these people. A lot of them, they had written textbooks that I'd read when I was a graduate student, because it was a little intimidating to start this board meeting. But I started this board meeting with this slide. And by the way, my students know this, and there are a bunch of you in the room. Those of you who don't know, I don't read my slides. So I'm going to talk about that, and I really believe that you can read. So you can see what I was doing. I confused a lot of people at first when I put that slide up. But I wanted to put it up tonight too, because I want to start in the same way. And my intent in putting that slide up was to have us begin as a small group with a positive experience. I wanted people to tap into what they loved about small groups, because we were all there for free. Nobody was getting paid. We were taking time out of our lives, and I wanted them to kind of figure out what lit them up, what made them excited. And then while I was talking about that, I put this slide up. Probably by this slide, they were thinking I was crazy and we were going to have one weird board meeting. The little girl in the middle, her name is Evie. She's my first granddaughter. Look at her face. Now, Evie is seeing her father come home. Nick is in the service. He's over, in fact, right now he's in the Gulf. He does 6-month tours. Evie was seeing her dad for the first time in 6 months. I think that looks lit up to me. So a part of what I was trying to do is get people to tap in, either in their minds or in their hearts, to what really lights them up. So I'm going to have light be part of the message tonight. But one of the themes that lights me up, and actually started when I was an undergraduate. So this next few comments are to undergraduates and graduates that are in the room. My father was an engineer, and you can imagine how social sciences were looked at. Yeah, exactly. And I got lit up, and I'm in psychology because of a course that I took as an undergraduate in small group behavior. It was taught by a sociologist. And it was amazing to me to see what I was reading was actually happening. I came from a small school. We had 10 students, and 5 of us were behind a one-way mirror. And watching the task groups perform experiments on it. And it was just fascinating to me. And the second class that convinced me to change my major, because my major was not psychology, was measurement. So there were 2 things, and I was fascinated by measurement, because can you really measure human behavior in a way that's reliable and valid, and then have it do something, mean something to somebody? I was just fascinated by that. The third thing, I come out of a culture, and these three themes I'm going to move together tonight, I hope. You'll be the judge of that. I came out of a culture, religious and a family culture of service. I was taught to look for service opportunities and to see if I could contribute in some small way to those service opportunities. And so tonight, when Addie and I got an award about 6 years ago from the APA, and we looked across our careers. Addie Furman is here. She's my mentor. Thanks for being here, Addie. I did the same thing. I looked across the last 30 years, and said, how can I make sense of that? Now, I have an agenda tonight that I'm going to tell you about. I've got about 20 students of mine here. Some of them doctoral students, some of them undergraduate students, and they're all working on different projects. And what I promised them is by the end of the night, you know, when you're an undergraduate and you're kind of, you know, coding or doing that tedious stuff, you sort of wonder, what are you doing? And a part of what I wanted them to do is sort of see the big picture and how the projects they're working on right now play into what we've been doing for about 30 years. So this was the first paper I published here at BYU. And actually it started in a class that I took from Addie when I was at the University of Utah, the school to the north. The intention of this paper was to put together my interest in measurement with my interest in small group process. And I think my sense is that most of us here know what we psychologists mean by measurement, but there may be a number of people here who don't know what I mean by small group process. So let me just describe that, because that's going to be a theme throughout the next several minutes. And I want to do it by an analogy, and my sense is that all of us know what it's like to sit in an undergraduate class here at BYU. So I'd like you to imagine that you're sitting in that class. Maybe you're a student, or maybe you're a faculty member. Okay? And I ask you to think about that class, and you start describing it with energy. You start saying, I'm really learning something in this class. And you talk about the students, and you feel pretty bonded to them. And you talk about the professor. He's pretty excited. He's got some energy for it. And you kind of get a feel of those kind of classes that you've taken. Small group process in a sort of a global way is trying to describe the climate, the personality, the feel of a small group. And in a moment, I'm going to move from a classroom to therapy groups, because that's what I spent my life doing the last 30 years. But what we've learned is, you know, a task group that Ben may be running, or a class that Joe Olson may be running, or a therapy group that I might be running, have a lot of common features. And so if you get that idea of what I mean by small group process, I think you'll have a sense of what, when I use that word as I go along. And one of the things we know, there are small group processes, just like when teaching, that lead to effective education and learning. And those are very similar to effective therapeutic groups. And we also know there's some stuff that you don't want to see happening in your groups. That's a part of what I've been focusing on with Addie and a lot of other people over the last several years. The first study that we got involved in, to me, just like the paper, set a tone for what we did. And it was sort of a simple study in a way. We got lucky and we got it funded by NIMH, so that felt good. I thought maybe I'll get tenure here. The simple question that we asked was, if we had highly skilled expert group leaders, the people who would really run really good groups, and we compared them to highly skilled, what we called natural helpers, what similarities and what differences would we find? Now, this wasn't a study that, I did this with Sally Barlow. Sally Barlow and I did this. This wasn't a study that we dreamed up on our own. There was actually, it turned out to be a relatively famous study that Hans Struck did at Vanderbilt. He had done this very same thing a few years earlier. And there was a controversy in the literature, and to some extent it still exists. And the controversy was, do non-specific effects produce as much change as specific effects? Now let me define what those are, because I'm going to use those terminologies throughout the rest of the lecture. Think of the epitome of specific effects as our expert group leaders, and you can see how we got them. We polled psychologists all throughout the state and found 4 people who rose to the top as people thinking they were expert. We thought that they were going to be able to manage group conflict, manage all the group stuff really, really well, and that they would be delivering very sound, theory-oriented, theory-focused interventions. I had just got done doing a dissertation at the U on therapeutic focusing. That was one of the things that we looked at. Makes sense? And then compare that to the professors. Now let me tell you how we found the professors. There were over 4,000 students who nominated professors on campus who came to their mind when they thought about someone to go and talk about problems. These were people who had cues outside their door, and they were many, many standard deviations above all the other professors on campus. When I walked in to one of these professors' door to try to talk them into the study, I felt warm. There was this man who just oozed warmth and caring, and pretty soon I just wanted to start talking to him, you know. But you get the feel? You know, it's the kind of natural helper that, and we called those non-specific effects. Now it's a lot more complicated than that, but just to give you a feel, okay? So we were looking for differences, and we found very few. This study ended up taking us about 7 years after we looked at all the projects that we got out of it. And for instance, we had 24 outcome measures. 22 of them, the professors produced exactly the same change as the experts. So I thought clinical psychology and small group treatment was in trouble because there were no differences. Then we started to drill in a little bit and said, well, what would we expect the experts to be doing? And we started watching the videotapes, and sure enough, we started seeing bubble up from the data that what was happening is the two groups were really using very different ways of achieving change. The experts were doing that theory-guided stuff that we expected them to do. They didn't do it consistently. They would focus more on some members than the others. And those members that they focused on actually did get much better than the ones that they didn't focus on. So, in a sense, our hypothesis had some partial support. And the natural helpers, the professors, just seemed to be loving those people. Now, there were 8 groups. They were run for 15 sessions, and the people who were in the groups were people through the comprehensive clinic, community folks that walked in wanting some help. So these weren't students, these were folks that, off the street looking for help. And those professors were doing, they'd use their own lives to sort of say, well, here's how I address that. Then we drilled in further. We used state-of-the-art measures, Hill Interaction Matrix, SASB, you don't need to know. But these were measures to watch moment by moment what was happening. We took the videotapes and we transcribed them. The average number of interactions in that 15 sessions was about 15,000. So we'd code 15,000 interactions and try to see what happened. And we found some things, mostly with respect to who got worse. The people who got worse were the clients who talked more. They were almost like cheerleaders for the group. Or they adopted a style of interaction where they were more childlike, and when the group leader would respond in a parent-like way, So you had this less than optimal way of relating. Those clients seem to get worse. So, in your mind, speed ahead. We just spent 7 years. My team is a much more seasoned team now. I've got graduate students who are really disciplined. We have undergraduate students who know how to do hard work. And in 1990, we were pretty much done with the NIMH study, and there were two things that I think set the tone for the next 20 years. The first is a book that Addie Furman and I did, and our goal in that book was to take the empirical literature at that time, the best empirical literature at that time. I think we had nearly 3,000 studies that we cited in that book, and say, what can we say to help group leaders be able to provide the most effective group treatments? In other words, can we teach clinicians? Notice the title had something to do with clinical synthesis. So we wanted to take what we knew empirically and see if there was a clinical synthesis to guide treatment using our literature. This Yahoo, Mike Lambert, knocked on my door in 1990 and invited me into developing what turned out to be a family of outcome measures. First the OQ, and then we've generated others. In a way, the two of them that I was working with were on the same page, because what Mike was interested in was, can we measure outcomes, symptoms, symptom distress, and make a very practical, real difference in the clinical life of a clinician as well as a patient? In other words, take and create something akin to a mental health vital sign. Just like in medicine, when you go and see the doctor, they take your blood pressure, they take your temperature, they're taking vital signs to see how you're doing. So both projects really were trying to take the empirical literature and make a difference in practice. A couple highlights from those two, because they set a tone for our lab for a long time. First, in the book with Addie. I don't know if this was conscious or unconscious, Addie, but I went back and I looked at the table of contents as I was preparing for this. And we broke the book up into different sections. And if you looked at those sections, they fell into two piles. The specific effects that we had just got done studying in the NIMH grant. You know, what are the theory-driven specific things that a group leader can do that'll make a difference? And some non-specific characteristics of clients and of therapists and of the group that were not necessarily tied to a theory of psychotherapy, but showed that they predicted outcome. So for instance, on the specific, we offered very specific protocols. If you're going to be treating an eating disorder person, these are the protocols that work, and talked about them. If you're going to be treating clients, here are client characteristics. Look for these kind of clients because they're going to be related to better improvement. The project with Mike changed the way that my lab worked. What we learned how to do pretty quickly was develop a measure, refine that measure, and then have it work in the real world. So I'm sure you remember this, but our first development group was 2 managed care companies that covered a total of 17 million US lives. A lot, that's a big sample. So we had a lot of statistical power, for those of you who get a sense of what I'm talking about, to be able to figure stuff out quickly. The other thing that we did was develop a system that actually worked. It worked in being able to provide immediate feedback that was clinically useful, that ended up making a difference with respect to how much improvement you could see in a client. It worked. In fact, it worked so well, I put this up, it's the only system, the only outcome system that right now that the federal government recognizes as an evidence-based practice. So in a way, we hit a home run. Now, here comes the service opportunities. Do you got the research ideas that we've been doing? Been trying to focus on specific effects, things that improve outcome, trying to focus on what really non-specific effects we should be focusing on. There were two service opportunities that presented themselves in the late 90s. And they ended up paying huge dividends. In 1998, I was contacted by the UCLA trauma team. This was before Chris came. And the UCLA trauma team, I'm over here on this slide, was in Bosnia. The UCLA trauma team got into Bosnia and started to do group-based trauma treatment even before the war was over with. Now, for those of you who don't remember much about the Bosnian War, let me just give you one or two sentences. It was horrific. It was genocide. And who these folks were treating were the adolescents left behind after they watched their fathers, mothers leave the planet in a less than desirable way. Horrific. UCLA contacted our team because the CBT group protocol that they were using, and this was one of the protocols that Addie and I had put earlier in our book, wasn't operating the way that it was supposed to operate. It was taking 2 and 3 times longer than what they expected. And they said, would you mind coming and working with us? That was one opportunity, both of them in 1998. The second opportunity was the state hospital. The state hospital, for those of you who don't know, it's just down the street. If you go Center Street and instead of turning 9th East to get here, you keep going straight, you'll be right in the state hospital. The state hospital serves 350 of the most seriously mentally ill people in Utah. We have one state hospital. The head of the state hospital knocked on our door, and he said, I have a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, we've failed our accreditation. Now, students in the room know what it means to fail, right? It's not a good thing. What does it mean when a hospital fails? Well, what it meant in this instance was they had $30 million of funding on the line. That's a lot of money. And the problem, one of the biggest problems that made them potentially lose their accreditation, was their group program was bad. The reviewers had sat in some of the groups and they said, you guys are not doing effective groups. Now you get an idea of how you could see that because I gave you the classroom idea. Okay, patients would drop out of the groups. They'd start with 10 patients and by the second session there'd be 2. Big problems. Let's start first with the state hospital. They were given 90 days to put in place a plan of correction. And in a way, we were perfectly set up to help them because we'd just gone through all those major reviews. We just published the work. So what we did, this is Addie Furman, Sally Barlow, and myself initially, is we went in, we assessed what the patients needed, we assessed the competency of the group leaders to offer that, and then we started painstaking training to boost competencies. We started to bring evidence-based group protocols in so they could start using what the literature said they should be using. And We implemented, so you see the handbook effect here, and we implemented a measurement protocol. Do you see the OQ impact? We started to give them ways of measuring how the groups were doing and using the best that we knew in the literature. And what we ended up finding, I think we've got 15 publications or so out of this relationship, is the patient improvement and the quality of the group. I'm using the word cohesion up there. Think of the relationship. Went up. The evidence-based group protocols that we're using went up. Now, right about here, I'm not going to read that quote, but I'd like you to read that quote while I tell you a little bit about where that quote came from. Remember I said this happened in 1998? Well, in 2008, we all know what happened to the economy. We were in the tubes. The state legislature, like all state legislatures, was slashing budgets. One of the budgets they were thinking about getting rid of was the state hospital. So the Utah state legislature hired a number of independent auditors to come in and look at what was going on in the hospital and say, is this something that we should close? Should we close the doors and turn this into a private hospital that somebody else runs? Or should we continue to use state dollars? Have you read the quote? That hospital went, and this is BYU proud time, you guys. There was a bunch of professors, tons of undergraduate students. I think since we've been there have been hundreds of undergraduate students who've participated in some of this work that I just described. They went from about ready to lose $30 million to being called a national best practice in their group program. And they highlighted in the legislative report the students of BYU, the faculty of BYU who participated in doing that. I'm kind of proud of that. Bosnia was an amazing learning experience. Remember, these both happened in '98. First thing we did when we went into Bosnia is we did something like what we did with the state hospital. We saw it as another service opportunity. We wanted to get to know who these people were. We talked to the students who were receiving the treatment. And basically what they needed to do is have less structure than what UCLA was providing. In other words, they were saying in different words, give us some space so we can do some of that non-specific stuff. So we modified the protocol that UCLA provided to us in the collaboration with them. Less structure. And then we did some studies to see if that protocol was really working. And I think we ended up with one book and 5 or 6 papers out of this experience. Some of them great journals, American Psychiatric Journals, American Medical Association journals. What we found is once we kind of balanced the specific effects with the non-specific effects in Bosnia, the group started operating in the right amount of time, and we got more improvement with those groups. But I want to tell you one story. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Sophie's Choice, but a measure came out of Bosnia, a group measure, because I had several group leaders come up. Let me tell you, if you haven't heard the movie or seen the movie Sophie's Choice, think Nazi Germany, think a Jewish mother who has 2 boys, and she has to decide which boy is going to go to the concentration camp and which boy she's going to be able to keep safe. Horrible choice. It's a fascinating movie. These leaders in Bosnia came up and they were crying. And they had a similar choice. For every 10 kids who needed this treatment because of the resources, they could only offer 1 the treatment. And they said, is there any way that you can use all that science stuff that you talk about to help us pick the best candidates for group? The group selection questionnaire came out of Bosnia. I predicted it would fail. It actually didn't fail. It predicted cohesion. It predicted how long somebody was going to stay in the group, and it predicted how much improvement they had. Now, 7 studies later, we feel pretty solid about that measure. So it was now about 2001, and we'd been in Bosnia. I'd spent months there. And we thought, well, probably what we should do is publish a special issue and tell people about group-based interventions for trauma survivors. So we had you can see all the articles that we put in that special issue to say, you know, we have some evidence that this works. The special issue came out in October 2001. Do you remember what happened 4 weeks earlier? 9/11. Now, in the group world is pretty small, and they, at AGPA, by the way, stands for American Group Psychotherapy Association. It's the largest professional association in the world for multiple discipline folks, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, whoever you are, who are interested in groups. Their office was blocks from the towers. I said it was a small world. They knew for a long time what we were doing in Bosnia. So within a day or two, I got a call from AGPA. They said, we just got a multi-million-dollar grant from the New York Times Foundation. Can you bring in your group to help us? Another service opportunity. You get the theme here? And basically what we did is we took what we had just got done writing and we trained hundreds. I remember one workshop where we trained 750 clinicians at a time. We used that grant. We ran over 400 groups. First responders, survivors, helping them recover. And after we got done doing that, we wrote it up in a book. So the book tried to capture a little bit. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker. I've just noticed the time, Ben. We got busy after 9/11 because you get the idea of all these service opportunities, and it's like, wow, there's a lot that we can do if we just, get a little bit more organized. So from a specific effects perspective, I counted and we produced about 18 publications. And they go into 2 groups. One was model recommendations for if you're going to be treating a schizophrenic, do it this way. If you're going to be treating an eating disorder person in a group, do it this way. So people had very clear evidence-based guidelines to help them offer the best treatment wherever that service opportunity might pop up. So for instance, with a schizophrenic population, we'd say, there are 3 types of groups. If you're an inpatient, you need to teach them how to manage their meds through a psychoeducational group. You need to teach them and their families how to manage their family environment, because family environments, if managed poorly, increase hospitalizations. Okay? So you get the feel? The second thing that we did in the specific effects thing is I kept hearing, all these years, I kept hearing, yeah, but group doesn't work as well as individual. I kept hearing that over and over again. So at this point, today in our lab, we've summarized 84 studies that were either random assignment to individual versus group or matched, and have provided, and you can see, provided an evidence-based argument not only at the aggregate level, but now at the individual diagnostic level. Now let me tell you why that's relevant and why I put it in. I just got back from Washington. We have one of our students who's one of the most senior people in the faith-based office in Washington. It's so cool to see her do that. This meeting brought together the heads of funding agencies that provide funding for mental health and substance abuse in the United States. The short message is funding is disappearing as states cut their budgets and the federal government cut their budgets. We are not treating the people we need to treat. And one of the arguments that we're saying is we're ethically bound, I think, to use group treatments. So we're arguing for the importance of group treatments from an evidence-based perspective. After Bosnia, our lab produced 3 measures. The intent of those 3 measures were to capture nonspecific effects. And let me just give you a feel, because there's a number of studies there. These studies were done and replicated in multiple countries: Bosnia, Norway, Germany, Switzerland, the United States. We did it in all kinds of settings: outpatient, inpatient, state hospital, non-therapy groups. We did it with all kinds of leaders: psychiatrists, nurses, psychologists. You get the feel? We had thousands of group members in these studies and nearly 1,000 groups that supported these 3 measures. The group selection measure, remember where that came from. The group questionnaire is our best effort at taking all that we know about nonspecific effects. You remember that warm feeling, and measuring them with as few as items as possible and feeding them back to the group leader. And we've looked at the group leader, and the group leader can't make predictions about these until they've been with their group for 9 sessions, and that's sometimes too long because a lot of groups only last 8. And they can never predict negative relationship. So this is new information that can help a group leader. And then out of the state hospital, we developed an intervention scale so we could teach people what interventions they needed to use to address low scores on the GQ. So if you had a low positive bond, and it's exactly what it sounds like, a positive bond, we have interventions to say, do these interventions, leader, and it'll increase the positive bond. So here's how we use the measures. The GSQ is done at intake. The OQ before the group starts, because we want the group leader to know what's going on before they start working with people in the group. Do we have people who've gotten worse that we need to pay attention to? And then at the end of the group, what we say to the group members is, we're going to do in our case notes. What we want you to do is do your case notes, which is take 4 minutes and fill out a 30-item measure about how the group's feeling to you, because we know it's going to be helpful to us. Here are a few comments. Again, I don't read my slides, so I just picked a couple. One of the things that we did, which was a little different than the way that we developed OQ, YOQ stuff, is we first spent time, maybe as much time, feeding this information back to the group leaders to see what we really want to do is this clinically useful? And you can see, these are quotes right out of focus groups of leaders who used our stuff. You can see with the GQ, they found a member that was in trouble. And they didn't know that member was in trouble, and then they changed their interventions to try to assist that group member. Same thing with the OQ. Here was somebody, imagine being in a group that you're responsible for where there's 8 or 10 people. How are you going to know what's going on with everybody? You can't. So we feed these measures in to help people understand what's going on. So if I've done my job well, what I've tried to do is show you how we've wedded a couple research interests, measurement and group, with some service opportunities. So the OQ created a pathway for us in our lab to create instruments, to refine them, and to see if they were useful. The state hospital helped to start matching protocols to patient needs. It also is where we generated the JEEPers with some partnership with the Netherlands researchers. In Bosnia, we produced the GSQ. And 9/11 led us to the development of the GQ. So it's been kind of an exciting opportunity for students. Hundreds of students have gone through our labs doing this. So I wanted to end You know, that is me. It was 10 years ago. I don't know what happened, Lambert. I had more hair back then. And so January 2002, I got a letter from Mitt Romney in the mail. And I nearly threw it away because I thought he was going to ask for money. Those of you who weren't here, the Olympics were in trouble. And I thought, oh man, he's going to ask for money. But I opened it, and someone had submitted my name to be a torchbearer. I don't know what they said about me. I hope it was true. And I was asked to be a torchbearer, which is way cool. But I want to tie it to the talk in a closing way. I went to torchbearer training. Yeah, you get to go to torchbearer training. And they actually take it very seriously. I think the first thing out of the trainer's mouth was, when you're carrying the fire, you're the only person in the world that's carrying the light. You're it. And then they gave us a story about how that light comes to be. You with me? But they also talked about, and I imagine they do this with each Olympics, they talked about the theme for the Salt Lake Winter Olympics. I don't know if anybody remembers it. I put it up there just in case you don't remember it. It was Light the Fire Within. And there was a song. Addie taught me a long time ago. She kept putting quotes in poetry and articles that we'd publish. Put a quote. So I put a little bit of the song up there. And for me, a piece of what BYU has offered, and I'm very grateful, is a chance to play in the sandbox of two areas that I love, that light me up. And if you're interested in that, and I guess I'm speaking specifically to the undergraduates and the graduate students right now, I think the formula for success is being clear on what lights you up, and then going and doing it. And that song, I just put a little bit up there. You can get a feel of what the song's doing. If this resonates with any heart, I'd invite you to go and Google and read the whole song, because it really is aspirational. Can you see the aspiration there? But it's also about light and focus. So I want to thank people for this honor. I want to thank BYU and the Hickman family, because I'm here. Probably might not have been. And it's been a great run. So thank you so much.
I think you got a good flavor for why Gary was selected for this award. And we do have a little plaque here we want to give him at this moment. And it's the Martin B. Hickman Outstanding Scholar Award, College of Family Home and Social Sciences for 2011-2012.